Last time I built him, now I'm going to paint him. Howdy folks, I'm Autumn Witch and welcome to Bleeding Tree Gaming. No waffle this time, let's get into it, after maybe you like, share and subscribe of course. So I started with a white primer and I am going in with Apothecary White over the armour panels. You can see here that I kept the model in sub-assemblies to make the future steps easier. It helps that this model is push fit so I can assemble and disassemble him as required. Because this is my big leader for my white scars, sorry Cosaro, I'll be putting some extra effort into him as he will be a centerpiece for my entire army. I am using contrast paint for the main armour, but most of the paint job will be done with more traditional paints. I want to get some shading and gradients on the armour before I tackle any of the other details. So I grab a sponge and start sponging grey cere all over, avoiding the recesses but aiming for decent coverage. It helps to cut a very small piece of sponge and use tweezers to hold it so you can better see where the paint is going. With the grey cere applied, I come in with Corax White a bit lighter and keeping it closer to the armour edges and the upper parts of the larger plates. Lastly, I dry sponge with dead white. It's like dry brushing, but instead of a brush, you wipe the excess off the sponge and dab it on the edges of the armour plate and on the upmost panel faces. As a rule, I tend to do this top down, as the brightest spots will be where the light naturally hits it. You'll have noticed that I used the same techniques on the cloak, base floor and banners too. Some of the parts are going to be red, but as I am undecided as to which will be which, I do them all. Now to get some base colours on. Eshin Grey is a nice dark grey. It goes over anything we want to be black. This includes gun casings, the undersuit, the captain's hair, the trophy rack, any piping and the banner poles. I start the red features and panels with corn red, following the old two thin coats philosophy. I paint the Crux pauldron red along with his mask, the side armour and his van braces. I am undecided on what colour I want to do the wax on his purity seals. I will come back to that later. I then take a fine brush and block in his company markings. I'm using the official markings for the first company as a guide and putting them on his greaves and on his banners. Of course, you could make up your own and put them wherever. Don't worry about being super precise at this point. As long as you have the shapes in the ballpark, you can crispen them up when it comes to highlighting. If it all looks a little too involved, maybe try just picking out some whole panels in red to keep a visual pop in the mix. Now, Balthazar Gold. As a Terminator Khan, he's going to have more bling than your usual Terminator Captain, so I paint the rest of the trim gold, along with the Crux Terminatus, all his bonding studs, and the metallic parts of his weapons. I also do the grille of his mask. I paint the chains with Runefang steel, and any skulls and parchments with Vallejo bone white. For his skin, I start with Bestigor flesh. This base has much less of a red tone, as is typical of Mid and East Asian skin tones. I will be using more traditional pinkish tones for the shade, but this medium tone should take a little red out of the end result. It's very easy to dip into caricature territory when painting non-Caucasian skin tones, and I want the end result to look realistic and not like Fu Manchu's first foray into Technicolor. Finally, I go around the model and tidy up any issues with the original base colours. As it is the most risky colour on a mostly white miniature, I'm doing the red shading as a recess wash with Carroburg Crimson. Then for the golden skin, I go over with Reichland Flesh Shade. This includes the bonding studs. For the black and silver, I use a black wash, this one from Green Stuff World. I also thin it heavily and paint it into the recessed plates of the armour to give stronger contrast. And for the skulls and parchment, I use Seraphim Sepia. Now for the fur, I will be using two contrast paints. Snakebite Leather for the top half and Skeleton Horde for the lower. I start by painting Snakebite Leather over the top quarter and Skeleton Horde beneath that. I then feather the Snakebite Leather down into the Skeleton Horde about halfway down the cloak and leave the Skeleton Horde on the lower half. Gravity then does the rest of the mixing for you. After that, I come in with panel liners and pick out more details on the armour. Now at this point it is best to give it all several hours to dry properly. A light dry brush of Runefang Steel over the chains and Bone White over the skulls and parchment. For the reds, my first highlight will be Mephiston Red, avoiding the recesses. I cover most of the red panels with this, leaving only a thin line of corn red to separate this colour from the wash. My second highlight is Wazdaka Red, which I use on the very edges. I decide to do a very fine highlight on the very sharpest corners with Fire Dragon Bright Orange. For the gold, I go back over with the base gold, Balthasar Gold, avoiding the recesses, and then come in with Auric Armour Gold just on the raised areas. I use Eshin Grey on the panels of the gun and other black parts again, leaving the recesses, and hit the edges with Dawnstone. For the face, I pick out the eyes with Bone White and dot the pupils with black. Here I carved a kebab skewer into a fine point. I find it much easier than using a brush. I do this first because it will be easier to tidy up the eyes with the highlight step than to risk doing the highlight step first, screwing up the eyes and having to redo the whole thing. I pick out the skin highlights with that Bestigor Flesh and hit the very edges and high points with Bone White. Howdy folks, Edit Witch here. This was the bit where I put the transfers on, but I can't find the footage. I mean, it's not like you've never seen transfers before. Anyway, back to Narration Witch. I do my usual muzzle burn effect on his combi weapon. I did a video on this, so if you want more details, I'll leave a link at the end. But it's basically a wet blend of purple over gold with Talasar Blue on the tip. Power Axe. Now, this is a simple blend. Talasar Blue around the emitters, Aethermatic Blue in the centre, and Imperial Fist along the blade edge. I feather them where they meet, and once dry, I come in with Aerial Yellow and stipple it along the blade edge to get rid of any blotchy parts from the Aethermatic Blue seeping into the yellow. It's simple, it's quick, and it's easy. So I finally decided on purple for the purity seals, Basilicanum Grey for the undercloak, and Baal Red for the outer cloak. You can see here that I got some Basilicanum Grey on the outside of the cloak, so I decided to wet blend into the Baal Red in the recesses for extra shadow, whereas the white highlights I had previously painted took care of the highlights of the cloak. I found these symbols on the Orcs transfer sheet and thought they looked suitably tribal for a white scar. I put them on the corners of his cloak. Weathering. Weathering hides a multitude of sins, and I am a sinner. Oh boy am I a sinner. I grabbed my Viejo pigment powders and worked them over the lower legs, the bottom of the cape, and onto the banners to age them down. I went with the medium brown for the parts that were weathered by the environment, and I did dark slate grey around the vents on his back and the top of his cloak to represent exhaust fumes from his armour suit, which is powered but not power armour, it's Terminator armour, otherwise known as never mind. I'm running low on Geek Gaming Scrublands mix, so rather than do a glue and dip like usual, I pour what little mix I have over the base and then sweep it to where I want it with the brush and away from where I don't. I then drizzle super glue over it, which soaks into the mix and leaves it utterly solid. Lastly, I attach some grass tufts to match the rest of my scars. And I just reaffirmed the black rim on his base. Now, before I leave you with some cracking shots of the final result, can I just ask you to like, share and subscribe? It's always very much appreciated and it helps the channel out. I'm Autumn Witch, and I'll catch you next time on Bleeding Tree Gaming.